So we're going to talk today about ranking. How many of you have questions about rankings? We all have to deal with that, right? Well, before we start digging into what the rankings are and what is the logic behind and history behind rankings, I would like to give you a bigger picture of what's happening in the world of higher education. Now, every time somebody asks me a question, either parent or high school counselor, it always reminds me about the musical chair game. Have you all played that game? So, there are about 23,000 universities in the world. Now imagine a classroom or a room filled with 200 people who are trying to get to that one chair in the middle of the room. That's exactly what the top 100 universities in any ranking represent. We have 23,000 universities around the world, and a lot of our students, parents, supporters, governments, they are trying to get into those top 100 universities. So besides looking at the individual level, at the university level, we decided to first look into the aggregate number by countries, by regions. And it's not secret that a lot of universities in the top 100, and I'm referring it to the Times Higher Education ranking, those universities are located either in United States, North America, or in Europe. If you look at the worldwide distribution of the entire universities, of 23,000 universities, the majority of them are actually located in Asia. Do we see a lot of universities in top 100 from Asia? Unfortunately, we don't know. We don't see them. The main goal of a lot of universities is to create knowledge, is to assimilate the knowledge. So we decided to look into the world research output for 2017. And the share of world research output actually follows the pattern of top 100. It kind of gives us a connection between both of them, what really they measure. So how did the ranking start? Where did the history of ranking begin? It began in early 1920s. Then a person called James Cattell created American Men of Science list. Surprisingly, that list is still being used. It's American Men and Women of Science issue. It lists about 4,000 prominent scientists from different universities all around the world. But the entire purpose of that first ranking was just to list schools which have those scientists that were very important in different areas of science. The first major change in ranking happened about 1950s. Then there became they switched from the focus on faculty and staff and research. It's moved into the research. We have citation index and social sciences citation index created in early 60s. And then all of a sudden in the 80s, the US News and Report listing came up. How it was created, there was a survey of 1,300 four-year college presidents in the United States. And they were talking about their colleges, they're giving some admission statistics, and all of a sudden we have now this commercial US News and Reports listing, which gives some information on the admissions side of the colleges and also gives an overview of campus facilities, all the features available for students on campus. Within 2 years, it reached 2.5 million issue circulation in the United States. 2.5 million. And of course, it was followed by different outlets in different countries. All of a sudden, we have The Guardian, Sunday News, we have Maclean, we have Der Spiegel. They all started to focus on the local universities. We're not talking about international universities. So it's a very common for us to blame something or somebody for all the things happening in our life, right? We try to find the reason what's happening, why it happened to us sometimes. Do you know a country which opened the Pandora box of international rankings in 2000s? Can you guess the country? No. Huh? No. One more. No. Last one. We heard UK. China. China, yes. So in early 2000s, Chinese government took the 985 project initiative, and they decided that they would like to change the education system. They would like to become a world leaders of education. So in 2002, they came to Jiaotong University, and they asked a person, a scientist, Nian Chang Liu, to come up with a list of the best universities in the world. Later on, Liu actually confessed that the government approached them, but they didn't give them any financial resources to do the ranking, and the only available sources they had was actually online sources. And of course, it's scientists, it's professors who are really oriented towards research and research outputs. That's how in 2002, Shanghai ranking, or academic ranking of world universities, was created. It was the first international ranking ever. There was a lot of conversations about the rankings. QS and Times Higher Education, at that time they were working together, were established in 2004. They split in 2008. Then we had a multi-rank, and rankings basically started to grow like mushrooms after the rain. So we're looking in 2003, we have one ranking. In 2018, right now we have 24 international rankings. The last one actually just appeared in June 2018. Is there going to be new rankings coming up? For sure. So how are we going to navigate through them? I wonder how many of you know those rankings. QS, just raise your hands. Good. What about the Times Higher Education? Good. What about the URAP? So URAP is a ranking created by Turkish government of global universities. Global university ranking created in Russia, and Russia was pretty upset that there are not too many universities in top 500. So 2006, 2007, they created their own ranking. There is Linden ranking in Europe. There is a G factor. The G factor is actually using a Google data. There is a A3 ranking. This is the newest. It was created in June 2018. So how are we going to navigate through all of them? It's a good question. There are three major drivers behind the popularity of rankings. And one of them was covered today by our keystone speaker, Kartik. And actually, he saved us about 15 minutes of this presentation. So one of the biggest factors behind popularity of the rankings is the knowledge economy. Knowledge economy is about connecting people and processes globally. A lot of countries in early 1990s started to move from the manufacturing economy, from economy where they would be focused on where to produce cheaper, to the knowledge economy. There is one report, and the report is called the Ocean Tom's Annual Study of Intangible Asset Management Values. And they're actually looking at Fortune 500 companies, and they're trying to assess their values. So according to 2017 outcome, 84% of assets of the Fortune 500 came from soft knowledge within the country. A lot of biggest and most developed countries moved to the knowledge economy. And there are a lot of projects undertaken by different governments, like Europe 2020, Smart Ireland, Brain Korea 21. Those initiatives are really intent to move the economy into knowledge economy. So what we did before presenting today, we actually looked at the knowledge economy index used by World Bank. And it measures the ability of the country to produce, use, and disseminate the knowledge. And we also looked at the numbers of top 100 Times Higher Education ranking, numbers of universities in those rankings. And you can see that they actually, there's a huge correlation between the knowledge economy index and the numbers of the universities in top 100. So knowledge economy made knowledge and made university as a core value of their economies. And that's why we see more and more countries who will move to the knowledge economy. We will see them in top 100 or top 500. There is really a very aggressive movement towards the knowledge economy. Another driver behind rankings was actually the graying population in developed countries in North America and Europe. If we look into total support ratio, which basically means the numbers of the proportion of the population in the working age and who can support either very young part of the population or very old part of the population, there are only two continents growing. One of them is India, is Asia, and Africa. And I truly believe that the population, the young population, India has, and if Indian government will be able to move the economy into knowledge economy, there is a huge future for India, and good things might happen. The third driver was the tuition, the raising tuition of universities, the cost of attendance. And again, students, parents, supporters are trying to make the best of what is available to them. And that's why rankings became more and more popular. I would like to briefly touch the basics of the rankings. And between 2002 and 2005, there was a huge growth in number of rankings. And a lot of countries, a lot of people, universities, they got confused what's happening and how good are the rankings and what is the value of the rankings. So in May 2006, 12 countries got together in Berlin, and they created the Berlin Principles of Rankings of Higher Education Institutions. It's basically a good principles and guidelines of the rankings. I would encourage you to take a look. The Berlin Principles of Ranking is available online. It's a very short statement, the one-page statement, but it kind of gives you understanding of what are the good practices. And also, before we start talking about what every single ranking measures, I would like to give you a small introduction into the sources of information. There are three major sources. One of them is a government. So government databases, and in the United States, we use iPads. Universities provide the data to the government, and it's basically statistical information. This is the most correct and most reliable source of information which can be used by rankings. Another source of information are universities themselves. Then they submit the information and data. And that's the room of gaming for a lot of universities. I think it happened more in 2006, 2008. It's happening less and less now, but we still see a lot of fluctuations, and one of the university will be ranked in top 100 one year, and all of a sudden they move in top 300 the next year. Because again, data was not submitted correctly, and we had those cases and instances now in the US news and reports, just happened recently. So that source of information is not that reliable. Another source of information used by rankings are peer reviews. Some types of survey, student satisfaction surveys. This also has a lot of bias in them. Times Higher Education, QS, Shanghai Ranking, they're also using different citation indexes. There are three major databases. If a professor or faculty member produces any research, any paper, it has to be quoted in one of the databases. Some universities use all of them, a very small number of universities. Some of universities will use one of them, and that's why we'll see that in one ranking, university is ranked again in top 100, but if that university is not using Scopus, they will not be ranked in QS. So you will not even see them in top 400. Again, there are different sources of information. If you look in the process of the rankings, we have three major groups of indicators. One is the beginning indicator. It's related to students. Like percent of international students is the input, is the beginning indicator. So what happens if we see different universities from different countries in the ranking? They have different definition of international students. Even for us, especially for California universities, for UC and for Cal State, we're struggling with the definition of undocumented students, right? They're students, they don't have US citizenship, but we cannot really count them as an international students as well. So one of the examples was University of Malaya from Malaysia. In 2006, they were ranked 67 in the Times Higher Education ranking because they decided to include minorities as an international students. In 2007, they were ranked 146 because of that. So you will see how the small inputs and small definitions can actually affect the ranking. There are a group of indicators which talk more about the university itself. It can be faculty. It's different learning inputs like budget, physical resources, library volumes, student satisfaction. Again, how are we going to measure student satisfaction? The way we measure it in the United States, the way universities will measure it in India could be totally different. We're talking about the infrastructure of the universities. It's also not really comparable. It might cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars to invest in infrastructure in the United States, but it might be much more less in Asia or somewhere else. So again, comparing and using those variables, we have to be very, very careful. Final outcomes. That's where all the not student satisfaction, but employability surveys are coming in. So how are we going to deal with the country which is right now in the recession compared to the country which is doing really good? Or how are we going to compare the employability of STEM students compared to students coming from the liberal arts? Again, we're talking about a lot of bias in all of those indicators. We try to show you different weights and different rankings. So even though the rankings use the same indicators, they give more importance to some of the inputs and less importance to another inputs. If you try to get information about the research, Shanghai ranking will be the best for you because it's 100% based on the research. But when we look into the QS and Times Higher Education rankings, they're different. QS is more based on the reputation because they're having a peer review. They're looking into employability of the applicant of the alumni from that specific university. Times Higher Education is trying to put more importance on the research, very similar to the Shanghai ranking. And the US News and Reports, they're trying to basically look into every single part.
Well, and I might add, Roxanne, the peer review is really interesting, and even leading, the University of California and many institutions, we have a lot of staff, and sometimes we need to even, as educators, spend more time with our teams because I think it's underestimated how much impact that you see in that right-hand column for peer review. And universities, similar to, and how many of you were from the high school level or counseling, directing? Okay, excellent, good to know. And then the rest, how about hands for higher education? Okay, what about other? Okay, perfect. Other, yes, exactly. So it's interesting to think about that peer review because the high school counselors, you get a lot from different higher education institutions to help you better understand the institutions. And I'm one of the people that often votes on the U.S. News and World Report, and I can't tell you the piles of magazines that I get in the mail from institutions from across the U.S. in particular, almost, and literally, I shouldn't say almost, but literally trying to influence my vote in terms of my understanding and perception of their universities. And it's not a bad thing because it's, influence can be a really good connotation as well. So helping me better understand what kind of research is happening in other places, what are they doing in terms of student success and their outcomes. But it's interesting how that works. So some campuses, and I think we'll get to that later, may have a strategy to say, we know who's voting on campuses, so what can we do to help educate the individuals so that when they get those peer reviews, they rate us at a high level.
So I just want to add to that. We did a survey from the school level. I was primarily involved in the school level survey, where we had a cohort of graduating class, the seniors and the juniors. We asked them which rankings do you consult, and you would be surprised the rankings that she mentioned was least used, the one with the research, the Shanghai rankings were least used by students for any sort of research. The most popular, can somebody guess what would that be? QS. And what is the weightage? 40% weightage is peer review in QS. So that is what they are looking at. And we've done some other research which we'll just be sharing with you, which is a lot of fun to look at.
Yeah. So just wanted to show you how the weights can impact the ranking of the university. There's a same universities, A, B, and C. The table on the left actually shows you that the university is going to be more focused on the research, and on the right is a university who is more focused on teaching. It's exactly like UC and Cal State. So we are more focused on teaching and undergraduate degrees, and UCs are more focused on the research, PhD and graduate. Yeah, research and teaching, but we don't have PhDs, and you guys have PhDs. So those weights, that's how actually the position of the ranking might change.
So this was really fun. While I was going through this slide, I was thinking, what is the major ranking instrument that my students and parent body talk to me about? I'm sure you all know, no prizes here. It is always the international rankings. Even the national rankings, apart from NAAC, nobody checks out. And that too for only one university that they talk about. Any guesses? Come on. Everybody wants to be an engineer in India. And you all know that NAAC ranking happens after a couple of years. We have some brilliant liberal arts universities present here at the conference who do not have those accreditations, primarily because they haven't passed those number of years, or they don't have enough number of graduating class. So they are left behind. Sometimes students, parents will come and ask, what is the NAAC ranking, ma'am? And I have to enlighten them on that. So college guides. I'm sure as high school counselors will tell you, their university reps also, there are hardly any college guides that students consult. The one that has become more popular is FISC. That too because it has been discarded by their seniors, and they just get it like that on a platter, so they tend to look at the FISC, which I'm very happy about. In fact, I tell my graduating class always, if you're leaving, please donate them to the school library. That'll be a good idea. So college guides is something that I haven't really seen, but the trend has started in India. They come in and they ask, what books can we consult? So FISC remains one of the most valuable document that we go to, and that too is used primarily for USA and maybe a handful universities in Canada. So we are again at a loss for the non-US, non-Canadian universities there. Accreditations. Barring the professional courses that they're pursuing, like maybe an architecture, medicine, pilot, which are going to have accrediting bodies, if they wish to come back to India, nobody checks out the accreditations. Nobody has bothered to find out if a particular course should be accredited at a place, and what is the, are they involved in some kind of a council body, so there is genuineness and ethicalness when they go to study there. The only thing I get asked about is it approved by the DGCA if it's pilot? Medicine, Medical Council of India, and there are lots of universities which are redundant. I don't think that list has been looked at by anybody in the government. Literally, I'm telling you, I look at the list on a weekly basis, and it has remained same over the years. So that is one. Evaluations and assessments. I've hardly had students question what are the evaluation parameters there. Simple questions like a quarter system or a semester system in the US, nobody questions that. It's only about a name tag and whether they're going to get that brand value. So the first thing they'll ask is, the return of investment is more if the brand is attached. So that is the question that I'm sure, I can see so many people nodding here. All the high school counselors know what they face when they talk about literally debunking rankings. It's not an overnight job. So that happens. Where does my institution stand compared to others? Now that is very linked to the national and international rankings. And the international rankings that they primarily looked at, I'm going to be sharing the research that we did also with them, the survey that we did, talks about basically the fact that how do they stand vis-a-vis maybe the 5 US universities or the 2 UK universities that they know about. And sometimes in the national ranking, there is a comparison of a Indian university, which is a completely different setup, like my colleague here mentioned, the infrastructure is different, the research is different, the faculty perspective is different. There is maybe no interdisciplinary happening there. That is not to be compared with a university in UK. So it is not for a college counselor to really answer also whether the national vis-a-vis international rankings differ. There are 2 to 3 websites which everybody consults. We did a poll on that, and what was exciting was that only QS and Times Higher Education was consulted. There was no mention. I had a particular ranking body like Shanghai, which nobody had consulted in that entire review, which is the most research-based ranking that we have. So that is what we go through. Classification system is another one I missed out. The only reason why parents will ask whether it's a public or a private university is because they somehow associate a public university to be low cost. And on top of that low cost, there is also that question, will I be getting a scholarship there? So I have to talk about the fact that it's a public university, what are going to be the options. And recently I had a parent who insisted that a community college in US was giving a scholarship. I actually had to write a mail and CC that to the parent to say that, this is the difference between a community college, and they are not offering any aid to international students, already very low cost fees. So you have to understand that. I have never had a parent in my 10 years of counseling ask me whether the university is primarily focused on research or graduates or undergraduates. This was something that I also experienced when the universities would introduce themselves. When I went to USA recently on a university trip, that universities talked about the fact, which was so encouraging, that they themselves were forthcoming. But I have hardly had any parent talk about this, really.
Rankings impact all sides of our life, not only universities, but also the governments. And we see a lot of governmental movements toward creating more universities which will be included in top 100 or top 500 international rankings. There are 2 ways governments handle it. They either decide to go with a select group of the universities and make them the centers of excellence or centers for research, or they will let all the university be at the same level and try to get into this top 500. Actually, that system was created by the 2-tier system. 3-tier system was created in California a long time ago. And in California, we have 2 state university systems. One of them is University of California, and Michelle is going to talk a little bit more about the UC system. And the system I represent today is a Cal State, California State University system, which we really focused on teaching. Michelle, can you talk a little bit more about the UC?
No, and it's funny, I was just looking up here, I wasn't doing my email or anything, I was checking, okay, when was the UC established? Because I talk a lot about the University of California, Santa Cruz, but looking in the larger context, and it was actually in 1855 that the University of California had its first, I would call it a scene at that time, it wasn't really at all a full-blown system, but we really now have 10 campuses. We have 9 that are undergraduate campuses, and the University of California, San Francisco is the 10th, which is only at the graduate level. We serve about 225,000 students, and so it's a very, very large system, and we have a centralized office as well. While we're all part of the same system, each of our campuses has its own unique general education requirements. Our faculty at the local level really establish our local policies, yet we do have a lot of system-wide policies as well. We were established now as a research university. In the very beginnings, often there were teacher colleges. A lot was really focused on agriculture, so it really begins to develop. In California in the 60s, because again, we are a state university, and so in the 60s we had really the master plan for California, and that's when it really, really began to shape higher education. And I have to tell you, it's amazing to be there, because when I was in the state of Washington, we actually studied the state of California and the master plan, and have really been in awe in terms of the structure, because the University of California is really to establish and serve the top 12.5%. The scary part to me, especially being here at an international conference, is it was very narrowly envisioned, in my opinion, because we were established to serve the top 12.5% of the students of the state of California. And so really, in the last 10 to 15 years, especially at the undergraduate level, have all of us really looked at internationalizing, really bringing in geographic diversity from across the U.S. as well as the globe. And so we've had to work with the system as well to say, quit saying that we were established to serve the state of California only. We used to be state funded, and now we say that we're state assisted because we get very little funds from the state of California now. And so our goal was to create knowledge as a research university. That was really, we're working with our faculty and certainly with our students to create new knowledge and to really serve the top students. And I say locally and globally is how I capture that now.
And the CSU, the Cal States, we have 23 different campuses in California, and we serve 490,000 students. This is the largest state system in the United States. Cal States were established as a teaching universities. So the majority of our programs are undergraduate programs, and then students have a chance to continue to UCs if they would like to pursue their master's degrees and PhD degrees. So state of California already established the two-tier system. One of the biggest example of this policy approach.
Can I mention instead of 2 tiers, the full 3 tiers?
Yeah.
I think it is really critical. Roxana brings a good point when you think about the tiers, because how many of you have heard of the California community colleges? Excellent, because we actually have 3 tiers in terms of those are open and available for all students. And I really want to give a plug for the California community colleges because that is an absolutely incredible pathway for students to earn. And some of our top students at the University of California have come through the California community colleges. They go on to earn their PhD at a University of California campus or one around the world. And so often people think of that, like that's the bottom and a third, and you might think about it in one sense, but economics, geographic location, all of those play into where a student will choose to attend. And so we see absolutely outstanding high school students who started the community colleges for one reason or another. And that's a support, really, right now, I've had to change my enrollment planning because there is a lot of pressure to increase the number of students coming from the California community colleges. And so there really are the 3 different levels within the state of California.
I think that very remarkable that policy, the government policy, happened actually in Germany between 2011 and 2017. Germany allocated funds for some German universities, and that process actually took 2 steps. First, they decided to try all the universities to make sure that they can select the centers for excellence, the centers for research, and then the second stage started around 2014. Then they started to create a lot of scholarships for international students, bringing all those bright minds in Germany, spending more and more money on research. So in 2011, there were around 10 universities, around 15 universities in top 500 in Times Higher Education. By 2017, that number reached 40. That's an example of the country who is really trying to improve and create those 2-tier universities. One of them focused on teaching, and one of them are focused on the research. Australia, Ireland, Norway, they're actually following the concept that, let the universities do their job. They can teach, they can do research, and it's really up to them what they're going to pursue. There are a lot of publications about rankings, and I personally like one person. I'm just trying to find the name. Haziken. Helen Haziken, she is part of the Dublin Institute of Technology, and she is really involved into rankings and international rankings. She was the one who was leading the survey of the higher education leaders' attitudes and perceptions towards global rankings. And if you look into that data, and unfortunately we don't have too much time to talk about it, but a lot of universities would like to be in top 25%. Surprisingly, universities in the United States, in North America, and in Europe, they're more focused on national rankings than on international rankings. And universities located in Asia, in Africa, in Australia, they're more interested in international rankings. when it comes to universities, it's really sometimes difficult for us and for university leaders to stay away from rankings, because it might impact the research, the financial resources allocations. It might affect faculty members. They will be pushed into producing more research and focus less on the teaching abilities and teaching capacity. Rankings are used by universities as a marketing and advertisement tools, and also the peer-to-peer interaction. That's what exactly Michelle mentioned. It comes into play.
And I might just mention a little bit with this that it's fascinating, and I don't know how all of you feel, because you have high school rankings as well, right? So you feel some of our pain. And I think it's fascinating, and I think I've often mentioned that really the ranking sometimes is a necessary evil. And what I think you see Santa Cruz in terms of what we look at, we're very cognizant, to some degree where we are from one year to the next, but it's not something that we're have an implicit, strategy to really look at, we need to go from here to here. And so I appreciate that about our campus, because it's fun to see where you are, and we give each other across the system a bad time. Oh, look where Berkeley is compared to LA, and, we have fun with it. But definitely wanting to see what you're doing being recognized, I think is something really important. But it may, again, I think like Roxana mentioned, really depend on the type of institution.
So these are the results of the high school survey that we did, and clearly the most important factor was employability at the average rating of 7.95. If you move away from that, the most important factor came out to be international rankings at 7.75. And mind you, these are students who are also applying outside of a United States or a United Kingdom, but yet these rankings seem to influence them. There are students, I had a student who really needed a scholarship, and we got them connected to a university in USA, which I think is a fantastic university. But again, the number game played the student got a full ride there, and she really needed that scholarship. And the parent came into my room after getting the scholarship, telling me that we are not taking up this scholarship. So that's how important the ranking is, rather going to another university which was not offering them that high aid. But rankings did influence there. At 7.55, campus location is a very important factor. I don't know how often I hear if they're going to USA, it's either going to be the East Coast or the West Coast, and the Silicon Valley is just opening up a red carpet for them if they study at a particular university, which may be true, giving you due consideration. But that is a location. We don't want to go anywhere else in the US. And for UK, it's primarily London. They will lose out on great universities. I had a student who literally told me, but ma'am, it's a village. And I was like, I'm so sorry, it's not a village. You have to be involved in the student societies. You have to be be a student ambassador, get engrossed, do more. There is much more to life than just the London pubs. Again, with due respect to any university which belongs to, Arvind is going to kill me. I'm very fond of the London universities, but just say that. So that is how important the location is. It's not a criteria based on just urban versus, non-urban setup or a suburban setup. It's more to do with the fact that they associate a particular location with jobs or a particular location with parties, and that's how they look at, locations. Admission requirements is 7.2 at an average rating. I cannot tell you how many students have given up the US dream post their SATs. So that seems to be a major chunk which influences. Suddenly I'm hearing the whole game plan has changed from US. We have moved to either UK or another country. Even some of the European universities have entrance exams for a lot of courses, business and medicine. They also seem to be out of the picture because they have those admission requirements. So yes, they did influence them at all. Positive student review stands at 6.8 at an average rating. So you can see how heavily that influences them when US News and QS, which are the main source of influence, have a peer appraisal and an academic peer review of 40% each, So that is how important it is. If a student says that this university is not worth it, completely the whole college list has changed.
relationship with the industry. Everybody wants to stay back. Everybody wants to do those plum internships. So that stands at 6.5. And then we go beyond that for a lot of other factors. Surprisingly, faculty awards only rate at 4.85. So that's one thing. We also qualitatively ask the students, so what are the rate 3 important criteria that you would, look at while deciding a university? None of them said country or region or what. No brownie points here. The first most important criteria was rankings. Which rankings we do not know. The second most important criteria was employability and affordability, both at a tie there. So both seem to be an important factor, in deciding a university. And the third most important factor was admission requirements. Does this university require a certain test or something that is beyond my purview? So that is what is basically, in a nutshell, the survey.
So as you can see, there is not going to be any ranking which will answer all the questions of those students. There's not going to be a single solution to those students. And we always recommend, at least when somebody asks me, a student asks me how to use rankings, I always recommend them to create their own, to think what is really important to them, to search for the information. We provided that information sources, statistical data, even the information within the ranking can be useful. There is no cure for that illness. We will have more and more rankings coming in. It's just, I think it's in our job to educate students that they really have to understand what is important to them and make their own rankings and base their decision on their own rankings. The last and not the least, I really like Hobsons International Student Survey. It's been done now for 2 years. It's available online and gives a huge insight for us, for higher education institutions, on what students are looking for and how they approach rankings and what kind of rankings they're using. And again, based on the information, she gave us QS is number 1, and the students, more and more students using QS. What surprised me, Shanghai ranking was number 3. It's not relevant for undergraduate students. It's more relevant for the graduate students, but somehow undergraduate students are still trying to use the Shanghai ranking. Please follow Hobsons. They really provide very interesting information, not only about rankings, but they also have very nice session on agents and high school counselors. So take your time to try to read through the report. And I think that's it. Questions?
My name is Jayshankar Raman. I represent not a public university, but a private university in the Midwest, and we're a master's comprehensive. Now, every university will always say 97% of their faculty are PhDs. We have class-to-student ratio of 15:1. Everybody has that. I think from a counselor's perspective, from a parent's perspective, you need to look at outcomes. You also need to understand that you know your students best. Some students can thrive in a very large university. Some don't. My younger son will not. So when he goes to college, he will go to a smaller college. My older one goes to a very large public university. So that's what you have to kind of put some input into. I see Nina here. Nina, we'll have to talk later. Nina from Pathway. Pathway sends a few students to us. And in particular, she sent 2 that are siblings. Both of them became student body presidents. The girl became a presidential commission that she was chosen to be part of. Now, in a small university, the environment is such that there is nurturing going on. There is opportunities being created. If you are interested in the well-being of your student, those are the kinds of things you have to look at. So yes, the parents will come and say they need the ranking, but you would have to kind of figure out what that is going to look like, because the outcome is extremely, extremely important. You can get a student into a wrong school and they can get lost. And you need to kind of figure out what that looks like. So we have stopped, by the way, to say, oh, we have this student ratio, this how much is the faculty with PhD, because everybody has that.
Well, I think that's something that higher education needs to take responsibility for, in my opinion, is that differentiation. Because I'm a true believer that any university can't be all things to all people, and even just using, if somebody really wants a big urban area for a research university, UCLA is where they should be. Santa Cruz may not be, but again, if you want that smaller, again, the college environment that's really distinctive. But I think higher ed, I often say, can you kind of cover that logo and get a sense? And my dean of undergraduate education always goes up and says, we have majors at every university. So then he tries to tell some stories, but I think we have to do a better job differentiating what's distinctive about our campuses to make your jobs actually easier.
I think I will just support, I'm glad you brought that topic up because I've been in this profession long enough, and I may not be the most popular counselor because my approach has always been to show direction. It's an advice. It is not placement. Most of the time there's a confusion between placement and advisory role. At the end of the day, I do encourage my students, I don't know if I'm okay, I do advise my students to take their own choice and be a little more accountable. However, we show them direction, and it is important, believe me, it's important for everybody to take that little ownership when they decide on a college. Names, ranking, everything is fantastic. It may give you a bragging value, it may give you a social standing for a short time. However, at the end of the day, when you stand there, are you able to sustain the environment? Are you able to grow in that environment? It is really important. I do give a very, kind of an example. I tell them to look outside. We have plants, we have soil. Does every plant grow well in every soil? Come on, take your challenge on that. It does help. Believe me, it does help. But still, if you have a mindset of ranking, that's a different set of students altogether. But as a counselor, I think it's your responsibility to show that direction. That's the way. Thank you so much.
There's a question I have. It's pertaining more to the graduate admission and not the undergraduate admission. When you are applying to these universities abroad, they definitely ask for the college ranking in India. Then we look at NAAC ranking in India. Now, what is it? I mean, if the college, as she said, at times does not have the NAAC accreditation, what do we do with that column? Do we leave it empty? How do you take it? Ma'am, this is NAC committee marking 4.5, so I'm talking about that. At times, these applications from the universities abroad ask for the previous college's NAC rank. I'm talking about the post-grad level. So how, how do you handle it?
So at Cal Poly, did the NAAC accreditation. We're only looking at NAAC if students are coming from the three-year university, three-year college, and we give them the option. It could be, if it's a college or university, and it's 3 years, it has to be A+. We're not asking for four-year colleges and NAC accreditation or ranking. That's how we handle it at Cal Poly.
It's probably because you need 4 years of university.
And the only way for us to accept 3 years is only A+ ranking and NAAC.
Yeah, and in UCSC, I'm not certain, the answer to that. In graduate
That's
school,
where, for us, most of the children generally after 12 try to be in India to do the IIT or in the engineering, and then they want to master as well and go ahead for their masters. There is where they get stuck and they ask for suggestions as to what to fill and why do we fill and which rank do we consider. And then they look at research-based universities as that way. So that my question was, how do we handle that lack of
Just make sure they have A+. And actually, it's a WES policy, West policy. It says that degree, Indian 3-year degree will be recognized in the United States if they graduated from the Division 1, and the university has A+ ranking.
And I think it's different from university to university.
I would ask, and I would try to ask early on.
Yes,
So
so universities, they want it a 4-year.
Any other thoughts? And I know that many of you in the audience could be up here presenting, so are there any perspectives that you have that you want the audience to have?
Just a question. In terms of for students in the undergraduate, high school students, when they're looking at college selection, how much of it is influenced by themselves or how much about their parents? Is it the parents who are more conscious about ranking?
I would say you're missing a very important element, Viresh. You're not talking about the peers. It is
Yeah.
definitely influenced by the peers, not so much themselves. When you say themselves, it's your peers and also your parents. Ultimately, the financial decision is the parents.
Right.
So there is that factor that comes into play, and many a times parents will say, no, I'm not sending them unless they're going to a top, unless the student convinces them otherwise. But yes, I think the major influence is now coming from the peers, and that's what influences the parent community also, because they're also engaged on a different level.
Thank you.